Yay! Hello, everyone. Welcome to Ginger Runner Live, episode number 323.
I feel like we're up there, but I also feel like we've been on episode 320-something for
322 episodes.
Months.
Yeah, months and months and months. We are finally at 323. We've been waiting for episode 323 for years. Welcome to the show, everyone. Welcome to Ginger Runner Live. Tonight, we're excited because we get to talk to Kaytlyn Gerbin again. We've had her on the show a number of times, but she's just always up to big projects, and whether that's winning races or getting out there and doing some crazy adventures and stuff like that. But today we're going to catch up with her about a recent undertaking running around Mount Rainier. We had Dylan on the show last week talking about his fastest known time around Mount Rainier on the Wonderland Trail. Kaytlyn, 1 week later, did the exact same thing, setting the new female FKT around the Wonderland Trail supported. It was incredible because she was basically giving everyone a run for their money. She just laid down the hammer, and we're going to talk to her all about that experience, what it was like leading up to it, some of the other big adventures that she's gotten up to this year, despite the pandemic, being able to get out into the mountains and trying to accomplish some pretty big goals. And then we'll talk a little bit about Wonderland as well, and what's going on in their lives and what's next and stuff like that. So welcome everyone to the show. We appreciate you joining us tonight. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Here we go. Ginger Runner. Yay! What is up, everyone? Welcome to Ginger Runner Live, episode number 323. Thank you for taking some time out of your busy Mondays to spend a little bit of it with us. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Just checking out the chat room.
How's the chat room doing?
Chat room sounds fantastic.
Good. Tonight we're really excited because we get to sit down with one of our dear friends, Pacific Northwest Badass, who we've had on the show a number of times. Every time we have her on the show, we learn a little bit more about things that we can do, things that we can take on ourselves, challenge ourselves mentally and physically. But one thing I just love that she's been doing as of late is finding these projects in our backyard, big undertakings, and really just crushing it. Everything okay with the laptop? Oh, sorry. I thought you were pouring liquid.
No, I'm being subtle, so you can just continue. My space bar's not working.
I was worried that like liquid spilled on it, and I'm like, okay, what do we need to do?
No, I feel like there's like a heap of dog hair under my space bar or something, and I'm just giving it a little shake.
But she's just taken on these huge projects and like personal lines through the mountains that take a lot of physical skill, a lot of mental fortitude, and most recently, she took on the Wonderland Trail, something that she's been looking at for quite some time because Mount Rainier, obviously she's been on the show a number of times now talking about Mount Rainier, like with the Infinity Loop and the like. So she took on the Wonderland Trail FKT and dominated it. Like not just set a new FKT, but like shattered it, which is pretty amazing. And we're going to talk to her all about that on tonight's show. But before we introduce Kaytlyn, of course, it's not just myself here. It's also you.
Hi.
Hi, you.
Trumi in the chat room's like, subtle. Nice. I was trying to be like professional and try and like do my like.
It was a big move.
Like,
It was as if I just were like to pick up the mixer board and just kind of step off camera. Like, oh, no, not a big deal. Just, I wanted to make sure everything was okay with the laptop.
Yeah, my space bar is not working. I don't know what's going on. Anyways, it's fine. Hi, everyone.
I'm going to stare it to work. I'm going to make it work.
Hi.
Hi. Kimberly.
What's up, everyone? Kim Tashima Newberry here. As usual, if you are new, welcome. We'll be bringing Kaytlyn on in just a second. Because we are live, you can ask Kaytlyn questions. So if you have questions for Kaytlyn, you can put them in the chat room. There's already a lot of buzz, a lot of hype about the Wonderland.
It's something that we've been talking about frequently on the show. One, we had Dylan on last week talking about his fastest known time, which while the show was happening, Tyler Green was on the Wonderland, currently attempting to set the fastest known time. We now know that did end up happening.
I feel like we all had like anxiety sitting here during the show last week.
Because I brought my camera to both Dylan's and Kaytlyn's attempt to film and document it as best as possible. Let me just tell you, it's kind of hard to do when they're running as fast as they run for someone who doesn't run that fast. But luckily, we had a really fantastic team of people with some cameras and stuff. Regardless, during last week's show, talking about the Wonderland with Dylan in real time, like sweating bullets while Tyler Green was on the trail. Tyler did set the FKT for men besting Dylan's time by 18 minutes. And just a shout out to Dylan's podcast, The Well. We mentioned it on last week's show.
Mm-hmm.
Dylan sat down with Tyler Green. The two of them, I'm assuming, hashed it out, figured out each person's attempt and how they were inspired by one another. I haven't listened to the podcast yet, but it went live today. So if you want to go listen to that dialogue between Dylan and Tyler, I'm sure it's fantastic. That is also available on podcast form out there right now. But there's just been a lot going on in the Pacific Northwest here. And the Wonderland has certainly taken a lot of the focus. And tonight we're going to talk specifically with Kaytlyn about her attempt and her success on the Wonderland Trail.
Yeah, it's just been great also as like a fan of the sport without races happening all over the place. There's just been so much excitement in the Northwest. So
Yeah.
It's been really fun.
Big shout out to our Patreon crew. We like to call them our GR crew. They are the whole reason that we're able to do these live shows every single week. We are supported by Patreon fully and wholly. So we just like to thank everyone who is supporting us over there on Patreon, patreon.com/thegingerrunner for as little as $1 a month. It does help everything we do here, from reviews, films, documenting the Wonderland, FKTs, plus this live show right now that you are currently watching. So we like to thank the top tier as well. So Brian Sands, who's just been a longtime supporter, we like to shout him out at the beginning of every show. Brian, we appreciate you. We thank you so much. And Brian is currently on his training. He's super inspiring.
Mm-hmm.
You've probably heard about him every episode of Ginger Runner Live. We kind of mentioned him, but he's currently training for the Cocodona 250. No big deal. Just 250 miles through the Arizona desert. No big deal.
Super casual.
Yeah, super casual, 250 miler. No big deal. But big thank you to our GR crew. Thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts for supporting us. And if you would like to join the crew, patreon.com/thegingerrunner.
Mm-hmm.
That's our plug. Okay, let's get into this because our guest has been waiting so patiently, probably fending off a dog who probably wants to sit on her lap, Lewitt, who's made an appearance on the show in the past. But without further ado, let's welcome to the show, Kaytlyn Gerbin.
Hello. Yay.
How are you?
Ellie just flew it out to the park, so we shouldn't have any dog interruptions.
Oh. We don't mind dog interruptions.
No, dog interruptions, of all interruptions, are probably the most accepted. How are you faring? You're now less than a week out. You set the FKT on Wednesday night, I guess, technically. So you're a couple days out. Are you recovered? Are you laying back? Are you kicking the feet up? What's going on?
Well, I always try to have ambitious plans for the weekend, and as expected, none of them happened this weekend. Basically, laid on the couch and slept and binged some Netflix. I'm feeling actually pretty good. Body's not too bad, but I definitely feel like I gave it 100-mile effort in the sense that I'm just like feeling great for a couple hours at a time, and then I'll kind of crash and need a snack and a nap, and then do that, and then rally and feel fine again. So probably will take a couple more days.
I mean, it's not your first rodeo. It's not the first time you've completed such a big distance with so much vert and everything like that. But how did this one feel different from a recovery standpoint or from a finishing standpoint? Like how does it stand out from the other performances?
I think it definitely feels very similar to other 100-mile efforts I've done. Yeah, I mean, the trail is 93 miles, so it's a little bit shorter, and the time, the time was similar to what I've done other hundreds and stuff in. So yeah, it's a big effort.
How has been off to a great start.
You got this.
How has So I got, this might be something that I should be holding till later in the interview, just as we sort of get there. But I'm also like, I kind of want to find out now. How has the aftermath since setting an FKT differed from like a media perspective? Obviously, we have you on the show. We're really excited to talk to you about this. Have you been approached for interviews? Has there been a lot of support? Because we saw a lot of it with Dylan when he set the FKT. We're seeing a little bit of it with Tyler. I'm curious if there's been this really good support system in place to sort of amplify what you did.
Yeah, there totally has been. And I was absolutely not expecting that because I've never, you never expect things like that, but I've never really had that for a race either. I think it's just like a different environment. There's not a lot of sports media right now.
Sure.
And so I don't know if that's part of it, but yeah, I've been like so positively overwhelmed. I've had so many messages from friends and fans and questions and people reaching out saying that they've been inspired to go after their own big goal. So that's always really cool. And then, yeah, I've had a few different like media outlets covering me. So I was in the Seattle Times, which is really cool. And then it was on NPR in Seattle today with
Cool.
Tyler Green. That was super awesome. I Run Far did an article covering it, and then talking to you guys. So it's been like really pleasantly overwhelming, which is pretty awesome.
I appreciate you joining us at the bottom of the barrel here on Ginger Runner Live. But when we saw the article in the Seattle Times, it was kind of one of those like yes moments where we know you. We've known you for a number of years now. We know what you do and what you're capable of, and just like your weekends of just shredding are like, what? So it's really cool to see this recognition. And the Seattle Times was kind of one of those like, nice, print media is getting behind it. Have you seen, have people reached out, people that you don't know? Have you sort of seen this new level of like fanship, I guess?
It's hard to say, but I know there's some people that are really excited about seeing things in like a newsprint article, like mostly from work, like my boss and my boss's boss saw that because they read the Seattle Times. So I had some messages over the weekend like, wow, you didn't tell us you were doing this. So that's been pretty cool.
Any pranks at work? Like when you got back to work, did they cover your office in Post-its or anything? Any of that sort of stuff? Like, yay.
No, because I'm working at home, so I haven't been going in.
What am I talking about?
As soon as you were saying it, I was like, I'm just gonna wait till he realizes what he's saying.
That is so weird. Like I pictured you in an office, like the typical office sort of weekend of shredding, and you go back into the. Where did that come from? That hasn't happened.
And I work in a lab space. I'm in scientific research. You guys know this, but so actually a lot of my coworkers are going into the lab space. It's just very different than previously. And I'm not sure that they would allow desk decorations right now, given COVID. But
the question came from a place of sincerity and like humor and fun, because I remember those. It's just crazy that my brain would not click into pandemic. This doesn't happen anymore. I will say I have had two different friends independently come and drop off a bottle of wine for me. Hey. So I'd say that's been a very pleasant surprise. That is way better than Post-its covering your computer monitor. Let's backtrack a little bit, because before we get to the Wonderland, you have done a lot this year already, and with the pandemic and everything that's sort of come as a result of that, your race schedule has sort of had to shift. It's been canceled. You've been focusing more on some outdoor adventures. Have they been? Let's talk a little bit about the projects that you're choosing and why you're choosing them. So it's not just, hey, I'm going to go run a crazy 50-mile route or something. It's like big mountaineering efforts, and how has this year been different than other years for you, training-wise and picking project-wise?
Yeah, I mean, like everybody, with races being canceled, everyone's kind of had to redefine their goals and expectations for the year when it comes to running. And that was definitely pretty hard to wrap my head around at the beginning of the year, because I think I talked to you guys on the show after Trans Gran Canaria. That was the last race that I did in March, right before everything kind of shut down. And at the time, I had a really big year planned with travel and racing and some new cool opportunities of things I was getting with the North Face. So it was kind of like just a really big, exciting year. And then, like everything else, within pretty much the next 2 weeks, everything just started shutting down. And it was a little bit of I'm sure probably a lot of runners can relate to this, but it's like, it's hard to be bummed out about things like that when people are losing their lives and losing their jobs and struggling in ways that, you know, the loss of a race cannot even compare to. But it still, I think, was something that took a while for me to wrap my head around, because I was seeing this as like a big year for me as an athlete. And I was making a lot of changes in my personal and professional life to be able to make that happen. So it took a while to kind of reset and figure out what I was going to do with this time. So as you guys know, since in the Northwest, we had, at least in Seattle area, we had a lot of public lands closed off, and we had a stay-at-home order in place for quite a while. So I spent most of the spring just recreating from the front door. And that was some easy bike rides, a few runs here and there, but really was like a lot of downtime and house projects, which I think is always a good thing too. But then as soon as things kind of started opening back up again, and I felt comfortable driving, at least like within the vicinity of home, I kind of refocused my summer in a way that allowed me to just go do things that have always been on my list. Like I've always, since I started ultra running, I've always had summer races. And for the last 3 years, that's been Western States. And so that basically has meant that May and June are always entirely focused on Western States. And then July is focused on recovering from Western States. And then I've almost always done another fall 100, which has been at the end of August or September. So then the next August, basically August, is dedicated to training for that race. And then September is dedicated to recovering from that. So, it's really like these kinds of huge highs and lows where I'm trying to still have fun with my training, obviously, and I enjoy it, but it's different than just having a blank slate and being able to just kind of go and do things for fun. So I kind of went back to like the things that got me excited about running and just adventuring in the mountains in the first place, which was really just like being out there and moving through terrain. And one goal that I had for myself this year that was completely unrelated to racing was just being able to get more comfortable in different mountain terrain. And I've done a lot of mountaineering and scrambling and climbing and backcountry skiing and things, but I really had wanted to get more experience in some of those spaces so I could essentially level up in terms of what kinds of mountain stuff I could do. And I basically did that over the last summer. I went out and skied. I've skied all the volcanoes in Washington except for St. Helens because it's impossible to get a permit, so I'll wait until December for that. And did a bunch of volcano skiing in Oregon too. And then in addition to that, had just climbed a bunch of peaks out in Washington. And many of them were things I've done before, but it's always been like in a whole cycle, I'll take one long run space on the weekend, take out the long run and instead go climb a volcano. And instead, since I haven't had that regimented training schedule, I've been able to just essentially do that. So it's been a lot of alpine slogging, I'll say, a lot of like 12 to 20 hour days in the mountains, not covering that much distance, but being on a lot of technical terrain. And that's been super, super fun for me, and completely different than essentially the last few years where I've been really focused on racing and training for races.
I think I kind of remember that from interviewing you around Western States last year and knowing you the year before that around Western States, is that this sort of block of time for you has just been focused on speed, distance, and like all running efforts, because States it requires a very specific skill set. You go into some of the international races, they require a sort of specific skill set. And I remember you telling stories last year of like, oh, normally during this time, I'd love to go do, Glacier Peak or these big efforts that do require a day or 2 days or multiple days that sort of take a chunk out of your training. And it's been cool to sort of see, okay, well, Kaytlyn has a clear schedule. What is she going to do? And the stuff you've gotten up to in the last few months is it's bonkers for anyone to do ever. Let alone back to back and in the same season and within the same week and that sort of thing. We'll get to that here in a second. But I do want to recognize that we are live with Kaytlyn Gerbin and we have a live chat room and then live questions. Kim's pulled a bunch aside. Kim, what do we got?
Yeah, a question from Randy. Randy says, did Kaytlyn and Dylan plan to do this around the same time together? And was North Face part of the reason that both their athletes did it so close together?
Dylan and I both knew we were doing it within about a week of each other. That wasn't really planned. Other than that just happened to be the window that we both kind of wanted to go after it. I think the window to do the Wonderland Trail is pretty small within a few weeks. I mean, it really depends on the season, and certainly people have gone after FKT attempts late into September, but the weather gets a little more variable. So we both kind of had the end of August in mind. And yes, we're both North Face teammates and that's awesome, but there was zero pressure from them in terms of us doing this together. It just was more of a cool opportunity to be able to kind of work together and help support each other since we're both local to the area now that he moved up here.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool to kind of see you come out to support Dylan come out to support you. It seemed like you both work really well together and really are able to push one another and stuff like that. we'll let another live audience question come in there because I realized that tangent was going to take me to a whole other conversation. So more live questions.
Yeah, a question from Brian. Brian says, does having personal goals and fun trips act in opposition to training necessary as a professional racer? Or could more fun be incorporated to actually boost training and performance?
I fully believe that fun things can be incorporated to boost your training. And I do that regularly. It's just, I think the extent to which I can show up on a starting line like Western States and be fit to run that type of terrain means that I'm limiting the amount of mountain stuff compared to what I would normally want to do. But basically always swapped a good training run for an opportunity to go climb something. I just think that there's a little bit of a dial, but I definitely think that incorporating multi-sport training into your own personal training, if that's something you're excited about, then for sure you should do it, because the more fun you have with it, the more long term you're going to be invested in your overall goal. And I think it's a really fun way to just move your body and build strength in different ways. That's not just running.
You mentioned to me kind of while we were filming the FKT attempts and the interviews and stuff like that, not when you picked the date, you weren't necessarily confident leading into those weeks of like, oh, this is the date I want to go, or what date should I go? And it seemed like you were concerned that you didn't have the running training because you had spent so much time in the mountains. Now, in hindsight, what's sort of your opinion on that? Because I know that you probably vocalized before the FKT, I wish I had more running. I wish I had more running. But now, obviously, the results speak for themselves. How has that shifted? How has your outlook changed?
I think it's a little bit of a dangerous realization that I've always kind of known, that you can build strength and fitness in other ways that's not just running. I do think some specificity is important, but luckily the Wonderland Trail has so much elevation gain and it has a lot of technical trails, where I think a lot of the mountaineering stuff I was doing earlier in the summer had actually prepared me for that pretty well. And another thing is that a lot of those efforts I was doing out in the mountains were overnight or just long time on feet. And I think especially when it comes to a, supported but like isolated FKT attempt or adventure where I really had to rely on myself for motivation, having those prior efforts helped make running for 18 hours not be that daunting, because I had already been out moving for almost that long many other times in the summer so far.
Got it. And I do want to talk a little bit about some of the things that you did before Wonderland, before we start digging in here to the actual attempt. For example, the Tarvikan Traverse. So can you speak on some of these big projects that you've maybe wanted to take on for a long time and how they sort of manifested this summer and this spring and how they turned out?
Yeah. So I'll start with Tarvikan Traverse, since you just mentioned that. That is kind of a classic hidden gem in the North Cascades, and it is not a running route. It is an off-trail mountaineering route. It's about 35 miles, and I think it ends up being around like 12 or 14,000 feet of climbing. But again, almost entirely off-trail. You're crossing glaciers, you're scrambling, you're bushwhacking, and it's a route that generally people will do over like 3 to 5 days. And so I went out with Ellie, my husband, and Gavin Woody, who I know you guys have had on the show before. He is like the king of bushwhacking, because like there's nobody that you want to be lost in the woods with in the dark off trail than Gavin Woody. Like, he is the most prepared person. He will get you through it. But there's also no one that you want to be in that situation with, because he just loves it so much that he will like find a way to be lost off trail in the dark. So that's a route that had been on my list for years. And I think part of it was time, but also I think the level of experience that is needed to complete that route in a somewhat light and fast style is pretty high. And it's, when you're moving and traveling in the terrain like that, in that kind of a format, there's not a lot of room for mistakes. And I think it's taken years of doing things similar to that have kind of built up to the fact that I felt like this year I had the confidence to be able to go after that and recognize the risks involved and accurately avoid them as best as possible. So I did that with Gavin and Ellie, and that the goal of that was kind of to do a scout so that I could go back a few days later with Alex Borsick, who was my partner for the Infinity Loop. And we went and tried to set an FKT on the route too. So we went back and did that. And that ended up being my last long run before Wonderland Trail, was doing the Tarvikan Traverse twice in a week. And while that was awesome and super fun, it didn't really involve a lot of running. And so I was a little bit worried that, I think just looking back, thinking that it maybe would have been better to do some sort of a run before I do a running goal. But, I also have done, I had a few good days of running around the Wonderland Trail with Dylan. We had gone down a couple weeks ago and did some scouting out there. So I think that was really good training. And I, do continue to do some runs here all the time. So I'm always running. It's just, I think most of my big efforts have been things like Tarvikan. I'd also done the Fisher Chimney routes on Mount Shuckson, again with my friend Alex and another girl, Anna. And that was a really fun route. I mentioned I'd skied a lot of the volcanoes. I'd climbed Rainier. Actually, I skied Rainier on the Emmons route with Ellie. And that was in July. And that was the first time that I had been back to the mountain since the Infinity Loop. And that was kind of, I think I mentioned this to you, Ethan, that was like the moment where I just like realized the connection I had with this place. And I got really, really excited about the Wonderland Trail when I was back there. And then for the scouting trip that I did with Dylan, we had done 2 days of running. He did 3. I skipped the first day for him. But then the next day I had some North Face climbing alpine teammates that were in the area that climbed Rainier in a day. And so I got to join them for that. So I basically ran with Dylan for 2 days and then had a day off in between and then climbed Rainier with my other North Face teammates. So that was a super, super fun week. But it was kind of like, I guess, a good picture of like what my training motto is in general. Is like get a little bit of running to make it count and then do fun things after that, which is like, instead of running the whole route in 3 days, like I probably should have scouted it, but instead I just climbed, and I don't regret that. That was fun.
It's crazy to think about just the volume of really amazing mountaineering and skill set that you have created, learned for yourself, and then utilized just this year alone. Like when Kim and I were seeing on Strava, you doing the Tarvikan Traverse with both Ellie and Gavin, it was like, whoa, like what a huge effort. We've never touched the Tarvikan Traverse, but we know.
Oh, I've done it several times.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, several.
Oh, that's amazing. It's something that you don't tend to do solo. It's because it requires so much safety measures and things that you really have to take on both mentally and physically, right? Like you can't just start something like that and be like, oh, this is going to be an easy 35 miler. It's going to take all day, whatever. So to take on so many big projects that do require such a high level of physical skill and mental capacity, how did the Wonderland look to someone like you who is at the level that you're at? Do you look at the Wonderland and go, oh man, I hope I can just, hold on for 93 miles? Or does it actually pose challenges to you that you look at and go, there's a lot that could go wrong here?
No, there's still always a lot that can go wrong. I mean, when you're running that big of a route, there's so much time. So there's a lot of time for things to go wrong, and they will. That's just what happens. But there's also a lot of time for things to get corrected or for things to get better. And so I kind of always try to have that mindset when I'm going into something really big like that. But yeah, no, it definitely wasn't a given. It's not like, oh, I've done all these other hard things, so this will be easy. But I think what did help me mentally was knowing that I've had so many big adventures on and around Mount Rainier that going and running the Wonderland Trail would be the first time that I was really just like pushing myself to see what I could do instead of pushing myself in a technical skill set sense.
Right. Makes sense. We have, again, lots of live questions. Kim's pulled a bunch aside here. What do we got?
Yeah, a great question from Ella. Ella says, Kaytlyn, can you please talk about your injury prevention strategies while you manage to accomplish so much? And Ella goes on to say that she is an IPOS over here, in awe of how much you do.
Oh, okay. Well, I hope she heals up and it's okay. Yeah, injury prevention is huge. I think with every big day, you need to have multiple big days of rest and recovery. And so I really try to make sure I hold to that and listen to my body. And I would say more often than not, I end up turning off my alarm or sleeping in to get a little bit of extra sleep, and instead of pushing myself out for a run when I know my body is actually telling me I need rest. And I think that there's a fine balance to figure out with that, because sometimes, so I think some people have a tendency to push themselves too much. Other people need someone else to help push them, to motivate them to get out the door. So I think figuring out kind of where your balance lies is really important. And then I also do a lot of PT and kind of core and stability work. And then I still continue to see a massage therapist, Leah, who is in Seattle, and she's super awesome. And I think like that's been something I've kind of incorporated into my running for the last few years. And I think that a little bit of all of that can be really helpful.
Let's get to more live questions there.
Yeah, I guess starting to talk about the FKT itself, Deb says, Kaytlyn, did you and Dylan start your runs at the same time of day? And what made you choose to start your run when you did?
So Dylan the week before had started at 4 a.m. and he ran 17 hours, just under 17 hours. And so I had initially been thinking I would start my run at 2 a.m. because I thought maybe I would run 2 hours slower than him. And then about a day before, I decided to push my starting time to 3 a.m. because I thought maybe I could try to run within an hour of him. So I got more confident and more aggressive with my time goals, and then pushed my start time back. And part of that was just that because I had paced Dylan for the last 10 miles of his run, I had the time of day kind of ingrained in my head. And I also knew what sunset was like along that last part of the route. And so that was like a really good anchor for me to know that, okay, if I finish at 9 p.m., that'll be my, A goal. If I finish at, 9:30, I know when sunset is going to hit Reflection Lakes. I kind of had all that whole mental picture, which really helped. So that's why it was that start.
Got it. Let's do one more live question. I'm going to start digging in.
You just start digging in. Okay. Yeah.
So I'm super curious now with 93 miles, 24,000-ish feet of gain. You're attempting a big undertaking. You haven't done a lot of running. You've done a ton of adventuring, a lot of time on feet, a lot of big day adventures and mountain summits and just crazy next level type of stuff all year. What were those first 35 miles like for you? Because would you say at that point that's the longest distance you've run in numerous months?
Other than the Tarvikan Traverse, yes.
Like actual running, yeah.
Okay, actually, basically, because I had also done that section scouting with Dylan, but I'd started 1.8 miles further down the road at Longmire.
That's right, at
Longmire.
So
I think it does still count as the longest section.
We'll count it.
Which is barely, yeah. I went into that section kind of just thinking that I was going to have to run by feel. I would do the best I could and just see what time I came in at. And I'd given my crew a pretty big window that started with the same splits that some of the guys had run, and finished with more conservative splits for what I thought I would do personally. And I just sent out, I ran with my friend Brian Bark, who I know you guys just had on the show recently. So he lives just down the street and also has a crazy Vishla. So Ellie and Brian and I meet up all the time for runs early morning. So really comfortable running with him. He knows my running well. He's paced me before at Western States. And so I was really grateful to have his company in the dark. And we basically just set off, and he did a good job kind of reminding me when I should probably be running, because sometimes it's easy to just settle into a hike when it's actually not any harder to just run. And we came in to that first crew stop there at 7 hours flat, which was kind of at the very start of my aggressive time split. So when we came in at 7 hours, all the doubts I'd had earlier in the day, which were like, what did I get myself signed up for? What am I doing? Why are all these people here expecting me to do something that I told them I was going to do that I'm not even prepared for? Like, what am I doing? All that kind of melted away. And I'm like, okay, like, let's do this. Let's see what's going to happen here. So that was a fun section, but it's a hard section because it's 35 miles, and there's like basically no way to hike in any different way. Like there's no trailheads that you pass along the way. It's super remote. It has the highest concentration of elevation gain per mile in that section. There's also some of the most technical descents are in that section as well. And I think there are, depending on how you count it, there are 6 major climbs in that section, which are like up, down, up, down, up, down.
Right.
So, 35 miles of 12,000 feet of climbing, and and half of it in the dark. So it's pretty burly.
It's one of the sections that, I mean, I remember documenting Gary's run, and he said the exact same thing when he rolls into Mowich Lake, is just like, that's the hardest section. You get about half of your total vert on the entire route in a third of the actual mileage. And it sounds like it's a doozy of a section and can either set you up for success or set you up for failure. You came in super fast. In under both Gary and Gelfie's time. And I know that we haven't really talked about that much yet, but can you talk a little bit about maybe some goals that you had going into this? You have Gary's time, which was thought unbeatable, and Gelfie bested it by just a little bit. The women's FKT previously held by Jen Shelton, and before that, Chrissy Mail and Darcy PQ. You have these times in your head. You called your shot. What were you sort of hoping to achieve when you went into this?
Yeah. So before Dylan and Tyler had both broken the record, my goal was to try to beat the overall time. So I had Gelfie splits in mind and had been trying to run those. I didn't know if it was possible, but I had first started thinking about that back in March after my run at Transgran Canaria, and I had been looking at the elevation profile and of both runs and kind of comparing them and thinking like, okay, if I did this on this run, I think I could do this on the Wonderland Trail. So that seed planted way back then, but I kind of buried it because, I mean, it's kind of absurd. Like, Gary Robbins is a beast. He's awesome. Ryan Gelfie, I have so much respect for his running and his time and paces at things, not to mention the women, Jen and Chrissy and Darcy. So I think it was like a little bit absurd, but that was kind of what my overall goal was. And then after Dylan broke the time and then Tyler lowered it again, I kind of reset my expectations again with myself and just was thinking like, okay, even though I'm not sure I can run under 17 hours, like I'm going to just give it a go and see how fast I can do it, because I really wanted to try to put a solid time on the board for the women, because I think I do it myself. I kind of like look at the men's time and then readjust what I think is possible given other finishing times that I've had or what I've seen other women do. And I think that can be kind of limiting to ourselves sometimes because we don't actually know what's possible until we try and we push it. And so I was really inspired by that and just tried to have a day and just see how fast I could run it without blowing up, I
guess. Brian Bark is in the chat room
now, by the way. Is in the chat room. He's saying Kaytlyn did okay in that first section is what he said. That's not what he says at all. I know that just after talking with Brian afterwards, he's just so like, his jaw was on the floor. He's just like, Kaytlyn is so incredible. He had nothing but nice things to say. A couple negative things, but mostly nice.
Well, I saw a bear on that section, and he, as my pacer, did not see it. And I was fascinating. It was a real bear.
So you actually saved his life too. You saved Brian's life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brian, man. You owe Kaytlyn a lot here, more than a bottle of wine. What was the level of excitement? I mean, were you paying attention to splits when you rolled into Mowich? So when you were you arrived under both Gelfie and Gary's time, did that stoke your fire?
Yeah, no, it definitely did. I think like I didn't know the exact timing, but knowing that I came in at 7 hours and I wasn't totally gassed, I'm like, that kind of helped set the expectations for the rest of the day. And I didn't know the exact splits. I didn't know like how fast I needed to go up the different climbs, and everyone's runs are so different and the terrain is so variable. So it's really hard to do that. But I think what it showed me is that the effort level that I've been putting forward in that first section was a good effort to keep going. And if I could hold that for the rest of the run, then that would put me in a really good time.
You chose to use pacers. This is a conversation we had with Dylan, a little less during the live show, but conversation I've had with him since. You chose to have pacers. So you started with Brian, then you picked up Tara at Mowich, and then your friend Alex at White River, who we've had on the show as well, and Dylan for the last bit. Do you think pacers helped, maybe pulled away a little bit from this? How did pacers sort of influence your run versus, Dylan, who didn't have pacers until you?
Yeah, so this is actually one thing that Dylan and I talked about after his attempt. We had kind of sat down the day after his run, and he was kind enough to give me a full debrief and kind of retell some beta about where he found good water on the trail, where the tricky water crossings were, all of that. And one of the things that he said was that he kind of maybe regretted not using pacers. And at the time, I had been planning on having people run with me in the dark because I just am a total scaredy cat when it comes to running in the mountains in the dark by myself. So I was going to have Brian run with me and then someone run with me for the last, 10 miles or so. But after talking to Dylan, I decided, actually, I think maybe it would be really nice to have some company, just someone else. I mean, it's so remote. You don't see a lot of people, except for 2 very concentrated sections where there are some more hikers. And I think just being out there for that many hours by yourself, it really can help to have someone else with you. And before, I'd been thinking about it more from a race perspective, that a lot of the European races I've done recently don't allow pacers, and but you're still running with other people, or you're still passing people, or you still will share miles with people here and there. And I think that all helps take your mind off of things and helps kind of pull you along. And so after talking to Dylan, I decided to try and recruit some more friends to pace. And luckily that was super easy to do because Tara Fraga, who's a badass local runner here, she got second at Cascade Crest last year, has won Miwok, just a crusher. She immediately jumped in and offered to pace. And so that was awesome. And then Alex, who you mentioned, you've had on the show before, and I've done a lot of adventures with her in the mountains. Funny enough, we haven't really run together ever before because we never actually run when we're together.
That's what you were saying. You had never actually run together.
Yeah, we did one run on Cougar the week before when she was passing through. But anyway, she jumped in right away too and said she wanted to pace. And then of course Dylan, like you said. So I think that was a good move. I don't think it's necessary, but I think it can definitely help for some of those longer, more remote sections, especially doing it on a weekday when you're really not seeing many people out on the trail.
One thing that I sort of wanted to touch on today is obviously Jen Shelton's 22-hour 4-minute women's FKT is stout. 22 hours on this route will blow many people's minds because it is a difficult route that many people, in fact, many of the people that I encountered out there on the trail who were hiking it were doing 7 to 10 days. Most people do it in a week plus because it's gorgeous and it's also really difficult. When you realize that maybe even if you just walked the last 30 miles or something, that you were probably going to get the FKT, so 22 hours or less, when you sort of had that in the bag in your mind, I'm assuming there was some sort of mental capacity of okay, 22 hours, I got this. And then you had to create an additional sort of carrot in front of you. What was the carrot? And how did that really motivate you to continue to push the pace? Because I can only imagine if you're oh, well, I definitely have the FKT. What's the inspiration to keep you pushing to even make it a bigger gap rather than skate in?
The carrot was trying to beat Ryan Gelfie's time, which I did not do, unfortunately, but I came pretty darn close to it, and I'm happy with that.
About 14 minutes, nothing.
Since I'm mentioning Gelfie so much, I want to just give him a shout out because I met him at my first 100 in 2016, which was Pine to Palm. We both won. He won men's, I won female. And I didn't know anybody, but he was just so awesome and nice and welcoming. And so I just connected with him there at his, which was his hometown, Ashland 100. And then my next 100 was Western States, and I'd raced into that for the golden ticket. And I've said on the show before, I've never had a coach. And at that point, I really didn't know what I was doing. And I messaged Gelfie kind of out of the blue, just asking for some advice on like how to plan my long runs leading up to Western States. And he coaches for a living. So like I was just asking him for free to give me advice. And without hesitation, he gave me advice back then. And I just really appreciate that. And I feel like it's examples of people like that who are just really good people in the sport. So it was crazy to think that I was trying to chase after his times, but he's a good person to chase after, I think.
It's crazy to think that, I mean, 2 weeks ago, if you had gone for the FKT just before Dylan, like you would have had the overall potential overall FKT. And I can imagine that carrot would have been incredibly awesome to chase. And so much has happened just in the last 2 weeks on this trail, from Dylan to Tyler to you.
Chris Brown.
Chris Brown, who also the day after Kaytlyn did her FKT, he did set it, right? The unsupported FKT.
Unsupported. I think so. I don't know if it's beneficial yet, but yeah, he was sharing about it.
I did see on Instagram, Chris Brown also had a great sort of Instagram story retelling of that, and he's shouting out Dylan, he's shouting at you. It's pretty cool. But a lot of action has been made on this trail in the last couple of weeks. When you were out there running, were you encountering hikers that knew what was going on? Was there like a buzz on the trail of people that were setting records and it was kind of crazy? Or were people angry that there was trail runners out there? Like, what was sort of the vibe that you got from the actual trail?
So to be honest, we really didn't see hardly anyone out there at all, except for at sunrise and then White River Campground and just after White River. So there's like kind of intermittent sections for about 10 miles where there are trailheads. And then of course people kind of congregate at the trailheads. So for most of the day, no one was upset that there were trail runners because there was just no one out there. There's some backpackers, but there's like beautiful lakes and alpine meadows and stuff. So people kind of stop. And so when I would pass people, they'd be like at their camps, not necessarily on the trail. Sure. So that was also strategic to try to do it on a weekday because I really didn't, I wanted to minimize interactions with people just with COVID. But then Summerlin Trail. So Yassine DeBoon and Ryan Thrower, who are out helping get some media footage, they had run out on the trail somewhere there. And Yassine, just being the awesome ball of energy that he is, had told a bunch of hikers around Sunrise, there's like the Burrows trails that jut out, and it's just like beautiful views. And it's all really rocky. And so there's a lot of space for people to just kind of like climb around on the boulders and sit and taking the views. And so Yassine had told people that I was coming through running for the record time. And so I like come up to this beautiful view at the top of the climb. I was exhausted, but there are all these people there just like cheering for me. Yassine's like, here she comes. And like, the hikers were like, doing their applause. So like, that was really, really cool. And I really appreciate that he did that. Similarly at White River, I didn't really know what was going on because I was just focused on trying to like get in and out with my crew. But at the car there was like a crowd. Okay, I won't say crowd, but there was a small gathering of people like on the other side of the parking lot, just kind of like spaced out and kind of watching. And I didn't really know what was going on, but later I had heard that it was a group of backpackers who actually recognized Dylan because they were out on the trail when Dylan came through and ran it. And they saw Dylan, recognized him, talked to him, and then he told them that I was coming through for the women's record. And they just asked if they could hang out and just watch and see what happened. So like I come running through and people were kind of cheering for me. And then it was like this eerie silence while they're just watching me put on nut butter like in my inner thighs. Which was of course probably entertaining for them. But that was otherwise about it. And then a few people that we passed going out of that trailhead because there's kind of a really popular Summerland area. And I was with Alex at the time. And because she knew that Trail Stoke is a real thing, she was telling some people as we would pass them that I was going for the record. And quite a few people got really excited. So that was awesome too.
Little side story. I know we have some great questions here in the chat, but little side story was that group of hikers that you mentioned at White River. It was a group of 10, I think it was actually 8 through hikers that were taking 10 days to do it. So they started 2 days before Dylan's FKT. When Dylan came through on his FKT, he passed them while they were sleeping. So they didn't actually know Dylan was out there. They didn't know about the running thing until Tyler, 5 days later, passed them going into Moich. And Tyler talked to him. Tyler, again, I'm retelling the story through.
So apparently Tyler had time to stop and talk to people.
Right. But I think Tyler sort of told him, like, or maybe his crew was like, yeah, I'm running through. This is Tyler. He's going for the fastest known time. So this group of hikers came in while I was waiting to film you come into White River. And they were asking me, like, are you filming someone doing the FKT? And I was like, yeah, Kaytlyn, she's going for the woman's FKT. And they got so excited. They're like, we saw Tyler out here. He was amazing. Did he get it? And I was like, yeah, he did. And the guy who said it 5 days earlier is right over there. So they went over to Dylan and they went, Tyler, you're so great. And I didn't hear or see this, but Dylan told me later, he's like, they thought I was Tyler Green. And I was like, you told him you were Tyler, right? And he's like, no. But they were so excited to see you come through. I wish I got it on film, but that's that. Live questions. What do we got?
I think this is a really important last question here from the chat room. Jim asks, Kaytlyn, any serious bouts of LBS during this effort?
Oh my God. I think you should probably ask Alex that question. I think I held it together, but I definitely hit some lows when I was with her above Panhandle Gap. I don't think I did a lot of complaining. I tend to keep things pretty dialed, but yeah, it was there was potential for sure.
So one thing that I kind of heard through the grapevine, I think from your pacers and from you when you came into Box Canyon, was that you were suffering more than you've suffered in other 100-milers, like with nausea and vomiting and like puke and rallying and stuff like that. That's not anything you really encountered before based from your storytelling. Was that difficult to sort of handle this new level of low that you've experienced on the trail? Yeah.
I mean, it was a new level of low, I guess, but it was mostly just a different level of low. There are always some lows. And like I said at the beginning, like it doesn't matter if you're at the front of the pack, mid pack, or back of the pack. Like your whole day is about managing things throughout the run. Sometimes that's nausea, sometimes it's eating, sometimes it's a blister, you name it. Like literally everything could go wrong. And like, that's some of the fun of it, is just trying to figure that out. So it was different because I didn't exactly know what to do to problem solve it. But, sometimes you just roll the dice and try things, and sometimes something sticks and sometimes it doesn't. And you find out pretty quickly, and then you try something else.
There was a question in the chat room in regards to river crossings and stuff like that. And I'm familiar with the one that they were referencing. Do you have it?
I don't have the exact one, but there was questions from both Tarumi and Matt asking about the challenging river crossings.
I think there's one just after Longmire that people had talked about with the railing off about 12 feet of it. A little sketchy. Did you have any issues with major river crossings, White River, anything like that?
Yeah. So the river crossing they're referencing with the kind of broken handrail, I actually found to be fine, but I crossed it, I think, just after sunrise. And so a lot of times the river swells later in the day as there's more snow melt and sun coming down from the glaciers. So I think by the time I had passed it, it was actually okay. And then the White River crossing, there's signs around it that, and we had the same thing with Dylan's attempt, that I had called and talked to the ranger in advance about this, that depending on the time of day, they recommend people to take the road detour. But we had scouted it and felt comfortable crossing it. And actually at the time that I crossed it was actually better than when Dylan and I crossed it together the week before. I think it just kind of depends on the temperature throughout the day. But yeah, there's a lot. I mean, I don't even know the number of river crossings, but it seems like one river crossing every 6 miles or something along this trail. So there's a lot of navigating, but I think scouting those sections for the river crossings, I think, can definitely help. And then I always have a track on my phone where I can follow if I need to figure out kind of where to go.
I guess I kind of want to talk about the last 10 miles before we kind of wrap up the main show here. But you spent the last 10 miles with Dylan, who had, again, set the FKT the week before, which had got taken by Tyler on Monday before yours. What were those last 10 miles like? Because you're probably you're running with the same person you ran with during his FKT. You're getting to share this experience together, but you're also about to set the FKT by a big margin. Was he pushing you hard? Were you guys having conversations about his FKT? Was there a camaraderie, a sort of teammate kinship that was created here? What were those last 10 miles like before you came home?
Yeah, it was really cool to share that last section of trail with Dylan. And I think, like you said, it's because we had just done that the week before and so much had happened in that last week that I think it was really, emotional, I guess, for Dylan to come back to the trail after everything had just happened. And I really appreciated the fact that he, just rallied and showed up to support me because I would have totally understood if he's like, I don't really want to go back to the Wonderland Trail right now. Like that, that would be okay. But he's a great guy and a good teammate and a good friend, and showed up to help run with me. And yeah, I mean, we tried pushing, and it was really just the limit of how I was feeling. And at that point, we knew that section of the trail so well. Because we had done it the week before. We had run that section together in scouting, and then I had done that same section before with Alex during the Infinity Loop. So there's kind of a lot of really fun memories that I have along that very final few miles. So yeah, it was just I wasn't moving as quickly as I wanted because I wasn't feeling great, but I ran some sections really well, puked a little bit on some other sections, but that's okay. And then just tried to enjoy the last few miles of the effort, because it really is like a big day and a lot goes into it. And I think that was one thing that Dylan had kind of reminded me of, just take some moments to really soak it in, because this is a pretty amazing experience.
I am happy to report that 3 hours and 323 minutes have been shaved off of the women's FKT on the Wonderland Trail, because the previous was 22:04. Kaytlyn finished in 18:41. A huge chunk of time was pulled off that fastest known time. Kaytlyn, Kim and I talk about you often. I think I mentioned this probably in more creepily way. Like when you tell someone we talk about you all the time, it's kind of like, well, not that much.
Yeah, you have said that.
Yeah. But Kim and I talk about you often in the sense of every time you do something big, it's like, what the hell? How is Kaytlyn so good at this? You really are setting a new bar, not just, hey, fast ultra runner, but talented mountaineer, skilled mind fighter. You're able to fight through those shadows in the mind and to push through these really tough situations. And you're really setting a new bar and a new standard for female athletes. And what would you say to other women athletes or young girls who maybe watch the show or listen to the podcast and are like, I want to be like Kaytlyn? What would you say to those athletes?
I think when I look back at my own growth in the sport and as a person over the last few years, I'm kind of always amazed at things that I'm doing now that I never would have thought were possible before. And one of the things that I've always struggled with, but I'm trying to just consciously change and I guess address head on, are my own expectations of what I think I'm possible of. And I think we often play it safe with our own goals. And I think stepping a little bit further out of your comfort zone with goal setting and just not limiting what you think you're capable of, I think can be really powerful. And if you can convince yourself that even if there's just a little sliver of hope that maybe you could do something, I think there's actually a reasonable chance that it's going to happen. But if you don't allow yourself to even get that little seed of an idea and plant it deep in your brain, if you can't do that, it's never going to happen. So I think just allowing yourself to kind of dream big and come up with some big, scary, audacious goals and go after it, I think probably you will end up surprising yourself more often than not.
We asked a similar question to Dylan, and I hate to do this, but anytime you set an FKT, you're essentially setting the carrot for the next person in line. And do you think that this time that you set, is it everything to you? Do you think you could shave off any more? Was it a full experience? You left it all out there. Do you think anyone else is going to go after this anytime soon? What are your thoughts on the actual time and your experience?
The thing with FKTs is that every person who does it faster shows what's possible. And that was part of my motivation for doing it. So I would love to keep the FKT for like
longer than 5 days.
But since I don't think anyone's going after it today, then that means at least I've beat Dylan's time frame of glory. But yeah, I mean, there's always time to be shaved off, and I think that anything is possible. And I would love to go see someone else challenge themselves on the course.
Kaytlyn, it's just, again, a delight to have you on the show. Every time we get you on, we get excited because it's always fun to talk. Just fun with a friend and find out more info on like how you do what you do, continuing to set that bar higher and higher again, as we sort of mentioned there. Kim still has a number of questions that we will probably get to in the after show. If you would like to join us for our after show, all you got to do is go to patreon.com/thegingerrunner. And for as little as $1 a month, you get to support us, but then also get all after show access. So tonight included. Kaytlyn, can you remind people where they can find you on social media, where they can follow along with future adventures, FKT attempts, races, and stuff like that, whenever that happens?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram, and it is my name at Kaytlyn_G, Kaytlyn. And I'm on Twitter, but I'm really bad at it. I use Facebook, but not that much. So Instagram is probably your best option. But I also am on Strava, and I have a public profile. So if people want to follow along and just see my training or lack thereof, they're welcome to go check that out too.
Lack thereof. It's like doing the Tarvikan Traverse twice in 1 week, mind you, for training is like jaw-dropping. Our guest, or questionable, sure, or questionable. Our guest tonight, Kaytlyn Gerbin, is one hell of a Pacific Northwest athlete, one of the best in the world. She just set the brand new women's fastest known time on the Wonderland Trail in 18 hours and 41 minutes. It was super cool to follow along. There will be a movie of some sort in some capacity in the future. We're working on post-production now and collecting all the footage and looking through it and stuff like that. But what we like to do at the end of every episode is also recognize members of the community in a segment that we like to call our GR Crew Member of the Week. So Kim has actually pulled our GR Crew Member of the Week this week. Kim, who do we got?
This week's GR Crew Member of the Week is Brendan Quarrell. A little over a week ago, Brendan set out to do a 100,000 step challenge. I think it was based through Fitbit.
I think so.
So a little over a week ago, Brendan attempted it. Brendan lives in Australia. There's a lot of very strict COVID restrictions where he lives. So he can't go exercise outside for more than an hour, and he can't go further than 5K from his house. So majority of all of this was done on a treadmill. So a little over a week ago, set out to do it, and he hit just a little over 91,000 steps,
Almost
which
there.
was incredible.
Yeah.
But even being that, Brendan then set out a couple days ago to attempt the 100,000 step goal again. And he nailed it this time with 19 minutes to spare.
Yep. 100,000 steps.
Go ahead.
No, I was just saying the number.
Yeah, Brendan got his 100,000 step goal like a week later. So congratulations, Brendan. Incredible. A lot of time on your treadmill. I'm sure your dogs and cats were looking at you like you were crazy. But
yeah.
Congratulations.
It's one thing to attempt it and do it. It's another thing to do it like 2 weeks in a row, because I believe his end kilometers like 75 kilometers or something like that. To be able to do that is just fantastic. So Brandon, thank you for proving it's one thing to take it on. It's another thing to take it on twice and get that goal. Congratulations, my friend. And thank you for being the GR Crew Member of the Week. That is going to wrap up our Ginger Runner Live episode number 323. We can't thank our guest, Kaytlyn Gerbin, enough. And we appreciate you very much for tuning into tonight's episode. And we'll see you in the after show, which will pick up as soon as this ends. Thanks, everyone. Get out there, train as hard as you can, virtually race harder, and party the hardest. I know I am. Bye.
Bye.
Ginger Runner.